The tavern on Nexus Station had no windows. It sat deep in the belly of the massive trading hub, far from the gleaming observation decks where wealthy travelers watched ships come and go. Down here, the air smelled of engine grease and cheap alcohol. The lights flickered sometimes when the power grid shifted to accommodate a docking freighter. It was not a beautiful place, but it was honest. The beings who drank here had seen things. They had stories to tell. Was young for a barely 30 cycles old. His carapace still held the bright green color of youth, not yet faded to the dull brown of experience. He worked as a junior trader on his uncle's cargo ship, running simple goods between stations. It was boring work, but safe. The valued safety above all things. Their species had survived by being careful, by avoiding risks, by never putting themselves in danger they could not escape. He sat alone at a small table, nursing a drink he did not really enjoy. His uncle had sent him here to listen. Information was valuable, the old always said. Sometimes the best deals came from whispers in dark places. But the whispers heard tonight were not about trade goods or shipping routes. They were about humans. At the table nearest to him, 3 spacers sat hunched over their drinks. One was his gray skin marked with the scars of radiation exposure. The second was small and quick-eyed, her fur matted from weeks without proper grooming. The third was something did not recognize, a being with too many joints in its arms and eyes that reflected the dim light like mirrors. They spoke in Galactic Common, the shared language of trade and travel. Their voices were low but had good hearing. All did. It was another survival trait. There was telling a story about a human ship. It had happened in the outer reaches, he said, far from any station or planet. A human cargo vessel had suffered a catastrophic failure in its life support system. The air recyclers had broken down completely. Toxic gases began filling the ship. Any sensible crew would have sealed themselves in emergency pods and waited for rescue. Any sensible species would have entered to slow their breathing and conserve what little clean air remained. But humans were not sensible. He leaned forward, his face twisted with something between horror and amazement. The humans had put on simple breathing masks, he said. Not proper environmental suits, just masks. Then they had opened up the broken machinery and started fixing it with their bare hands. They worked for hours in air that should have killed them. Their bodies turned red. Blood came from their noses and their eyes. One of them collapsed twice and got back up both times. When the rescue team finally arrived, they found the humans sitting in a functional ship with working life support. They were injured and exhausted, coughing blood into rags, but they were alive, and they were laughing. The eye made a sound of disbelief. Impossible, she said. No species could survive that. They must be exaggerating. But the being with too many joints shook its head slowly. It had heard similar stories, it said. Many of them. There was the human who had walked for 10 days across a frozen moon after her vehicle broke down. There was the human colony that had survived for 3 years on a planet where the native plants were poisonous, learning through trial and error which ones would only make them sick instead of killing them. There was the human soldier who had held a defensive position for almost a full rotation of a standard day, without sleep, without rest, fighting off wave after wave of attackers. Felt his mandibles click together in the expression of skepticism. These were tall tailies. Every species had them. Stories grew larger with each telling. The humans were newcomers to the galactic community, barely a century since their first contact. They were still mysterious, still strange. Of course, spacers would tell exaggerated stories about them. He was about to turn his attention elsewhere when a new voice spoke up from the bar. The voice belonged to one of the ancient scholar species. She was old even by standards, her scales faded to a pale silver, her eyes clouded with age. She sat alone on a stool, a glass of something dark and strong in her withered hand. The stories were not exaggerated, she said. Her voice was quiet but clear, cutting through the noise of the tavern. If anything, they were understated. The spacers turned to look at her, so did The old had studied humans, she explained. It had been her life's work before she retired from the academy. She had read their history, examined their biology, interviewed their scholars and soldiers and ordinary citizens. She had spent decades trying to understand what they were. She took a long drink before continuing. Humans, she said, came from a world that the Galactic Council had classified as a death world. It was not the most dangerous planet in known space, but it was far from safe. The climate shifted constantly, swinging between extremes of heat and cold. The geology was unstable, with earthquakes and volcanic eruptions reshaping the land. The other life forms were competitive and often deadly. Predators hunted in packs. Prey animals developed horns and hooves and poison. And yet humans had not evolved to be the strongest or the fastest. They were soft and slow compared to many Earth creatures. They had no claws, no fangs, no armor. Their senses were mediocre at best. What they had instead was persistence. The old explained how humans had hunted in the ancient times. They did not chase down their prey with speed. They followed it, for hours, for days. They walked after it under the burning sun while the animal ran and rested and ran again. Eventually the prey would collapse from exhaustion, its body overwhelmed by heat and effort. The humans would catch up to it, still walking, still moving, and finish it off. They called it persistence hunting, she said. They were not the fastest runners in a sprint, but over long distances, over extended time, nothing on their planet could outlast them. The eye looked disturbed by this. It seemed wrong to her, almost obscene, hunting by simply refusing to stop. But that was just the beginning, the continued. Humans had other traits that made them dangerous. Their bodies could heal from injuries that would kill most species. They could lose limbs and survive. They could be poisoned and recover. They could break bones and mend them. They could lose blood and make more. And their minds were just as resilient. Humans could endure psychological stress that would shatter other beings. They could watch their companions die and keep fighting. They could face certain death and still search for a way out. They did not give up. They did not accept defeat. Even when logic said there was no hope, humans would continue struggling. The spacers were silent now. Even the background noise of the tavern seemed muted. Felt a strange sensation in his thorax, something between fear and fascination. He had never thought much about humans before. They were just another species in the crowded galaxy, strange-looking and somewhat primitive. But listening to the old, he began to see them differently. The scholar finished her drink and set the glass down with a soft click. The most remarkable thing about humans, she said, was not their physical abilities. It was that they chose not to use them for conquest. They had the capacity to be the greatest predators the galaxy had ever seen. Instead, they built trade relationships. They formed alliances. They shared technology and culture and ideas. But make no mistake, she added, the potential was always there, sleeping beneath the surface. Every human carried within them the legacy of persistence hunters, of survivors, of beings who had clawed their way to dominance on a hostile world through sheer stubborn refusal to die. The spacers exchanged uneasy glances. Was about to ask the old a question when the door to the tavern slid open. A figure stepped through, silhouetted against the brighter light of the corridor beyond. Then the door closed and the figure became clear. It was a human. The being was unremarkable by human standards. Medium height, medium build, with the brown skin and dark hair common to one of their ethnic groups. The human wore simple spacer clothing, practical and worn from use. There were dark circles under the eyes, the universal sign of exhaustion. The human walked to the bar and sat down on a stool. A hand went up to signal the bartender. A tired voice ordered something to drink. That was all, nothing dramatic, nothing impressive, just another weary traveler looking for a moment of rest. But noticed that the entire tavern had gone quiet. Every being in the room was watching the human, the eye and the thing with too many joints. The bartender and the server drones and the other customers scattered throughout the dim space, all of them watching. The human did not seem to notice, or perhaps simply did not care. The drink arrived and the human picked it up and took a long sip, staring at nothing in particular. The old caught's eye and made a gesture that the young did not fully understand. It might have been amusement, it might have been warning. Then she turned away and ordered another drink for herself. Slowly, gradually, the noise returned to the tavern. Conversations resumed. The spacers went back to their stories. Life continued as it always did in places like this, in the forgotten corners of the galaxy where beings gathered to rest and drink and share what they had seen. But did not stop watching the human. He sat there for a long time, his own drink forgotten, studying this strange creature that looked so ordinary and yet carried within it the potential for such extraordinary things. The human finished the drink, paid, and left without speaking to anyone. The door slid open and closed again. The figure was gone. Sat alone with his thoughts, and he wondered what other stories were out there, waiting to be told. The Galactic Council chamber was vast and cold. It had been designed that way on purpose, built to hold representatives from dozens of species with different environmental needs. The temperature stayed low to accommodate the cold-blooded delegates, while heating units built into certain seats kept the warm-blooded ones comfortable. The air carried a faint chemical smell, a neutral mixture that offended no one's senses too badly. Stood at the central podium and felt very small. The chamber rose around her in tiers, each level holding delegates from different worlds. She could see thee in their sealed environmental bubbles, the massive with their stone-gray skin and 4 powerful arms, the delicate eye clustered together for warmth, the ancient sitting motionless as statues, dozens of other species she had studied but never met in person. They were all looking at her, all waiting. Was 43 years old. She had spent 20 years in the diplomatic corps, working her way up from junior to full ambassador. She had negotiated trade agreements and border disputes and cultural exchanges. She had never been afraid of public speaking. But this was different. This was a formal hearing to determine whether her entire species should be reclassified. The High Speaker opened the proceedings. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. He read from a prepared statement, listing the concerns that had been raised about humanity. Reports of unusual physical capabilities, evidence of extreme survival behaviors, questions about whether humans had been deliberately concealing their true nature from the galactic community. The Council had decided to investigate. Ambassador had been summoned to provide testimony. Listened to the charges and kept her face calm. Inside, she felt a complicated mix of emotions. There was anger, certainly. Her people were being treated like suspects, like potential threats. But there was also a strange sort of pride. The galaxy was finally starting to understand what humans really were. When the High Speaker finished, he invited her to respond. Took a breath and began. She started by acknowledging that humans had not been entirely forthcoming about their biology. This was true. When humanity first made contact with the galactic community, they had been advised by their own experts to downplay certain aspects of their nature. The galaxy was full of fearful species. It seemed wise not to frighten potential allies. But she rejected the word concealment. Humans had not lied. They had simply not volunteered information that no one had asked about. And if other species had made assumptions based on incomplete data, that was not humanity's fault. The delegate interrupted. He wanted specific answers to specific questions. How did humans heal so quickly? Why did their bodies produce chemicals that allowed them to perform impossible physical feats? Why did they form emotional bonds with dangerous animals and keep them as companions? Smiled slightly. These questions revealed how little the galaxy really understood about Earth. She began her explanation with the planet itself. Earth was what the Council classified as a Category 7 world, commonly called a death world. The term was not entirely accurate, she said. Earth was not unusually hostile compared to the most dangerous planets in the galaxy, but it was challenging, unpredictable. It required adaptability to survive. The climate on Earth had shifted many times throughout its history. Ice ages had come and gone. Deserts had spread and retreated. Sea levels had risen and fallen. The species that survived were the ones that could adjust to changing conditions. Humans had evolved in this environment. They had not become specialists, perfectly adapted to one particular habitat. Instead, they had become generalists, capable of surviving almost anywhere. They could live in frozen tundra and tropical jungles and dry grasslands in coastal regions. They could eat almost anything. They could endure heat and cold, drought and flood, abundance and scarcity. This adaptability came with certain biological features. Human healing was not magical explained. It was simply efficient. Their bodies prioritized survival above all else. When injured, humans entered a state of increased cellular repair. Wounds closed faster. Bones knitted back together. Organs regenerated to some degree. It was not instantaneous and it was not unlimited. But compared to many species, humans recovered from damage remarkably quickly. As for the chemicals they had mentioned, explained that humans called them stress hormones. Adrenaline, cortisol, others. When humans perceived danger, their bodies flooded with these substances. Heart rate increased. Pain sensitivity decreased. Strength and speed temporarily improved. It was a survival mechanism designed to help humans fight or flee from predators. The effects could be dramatic. There were documented cases of humans lifting enormous weights to save trapped loved ones. Humans running faster than should have been physically possible. Humans continuing to function despite injuries that should have incapacitated them. A delegate spoke up, her voice high and nervous. She asked about the bonding behavior. Why did humans keep predators in their homes? Why did they form attachments to dangerous creatures? Consider the question carefully before answering. Humans, she said, were social animals. They formed strong emotional connections with other beings. This was another survival trait. In the ancient times, humans had lived in groups for protection and cooperation. Loyalty to the group was essential. Those who could form strong bonds were more likely to survive and reproduce. This bonding instinct extended beyond other humans. Early in their history, humans had formed partnerships with wolves, another social predator. The wolves helped humans hunt. The humans shared food and shelter with the wolves. Over thousands of years, the wolves changed, becoming the animals humans now call dogs. But the instinct went further than practical partnerships. Humans could bond with almost anything. They kept as companions creatures that offered no practical benefit whatsoever. They formed emotional attachments to animals that could kill them. They mourned when these companions died. They risked their own lives to protect them. It was irrational by most standards, admitted, but it was deeply human. The chamber was quiet. The delegates were processing this information, fitting it into their understanding of the strange species that had joined the galactic community. Then the High Speaker asked the question that had been expecting, the question that hung over the entire hearing like a shadow. If humans could endure so much, if they could heal and fight and survive beyond what other species considered possible, why had they not conquered the galaxy? Why had they not used their abilities to dominate weaker species? Looked up at the tiers of delegates surrounding her. Dozens of species, each with their own history, their own fears, their own ambitions. Many of them had conquered others in the past. Many of them still thought in terms of dominance and submission. She chose her words carefully. Humans could have been conquerors, she said. Their history was full of violence and war. They had fought among themselves for thousands of years, competing for resources and territory and power. They knew how to kill. They knew how to destroy. But they had also learned something else. They had learned that cooperation was more effective than conquest in the long term. Empires built on force eventually collapsed. Alliances built on mutual benefit could last for generations. Humanity had joined the galactic community not as conquerors, but as partners. They had traded relationships with hundreds of worlds. They shared technology and culture and ideas freely. They asked for nothing except fair treatment and honest dealing. This was a choice emphasized, not a weakness. Humans had the capacity for terrible violence. They chose not to use it except in defense of themselves and their allies. They chose to build rather than destroy. They chose to connect rather than dominate. She paused, then added one final thought. The galaxy should not fear what humans might do if provoked, she said. It should appreciate what humans chose not to do every single day. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then the High Speaker called for a vote on the reclassification proposal. The vote was complicated. Different factions had different concerns. Some delegates wanted humans classified as a potential threat. Others argued that such a classification would damage diplomatic relations. A few suggested that the current system was inadequate for a species as unusual as humanity. In the end, the Council voted to table the proposal for further study. The question of human classification would remain open. Accepted this outcome with grace. It was not a victory, but it was not a defeat either. The galaxy was still learning about humanity. That process would take time. As she left the chamber, she passed a group of younger delegates who had been watching from the observation gallery. They looked at her with something she recognized. It was the same expression she had seen on the faces of beings throughout the galaxy whenever they encountered humans for the first time. It was not quite fear. It was not quite respect. It was something in between, something that said they were seeing a creature they did not fully understand and were not sure they wanted to. Smiled at them politely and kept walking. Outside the council building, the station stretched away in all directions. Ships came and went. Beings of every species hurried about their business. Life continued as it always did, regardless of what happened in the halls of power. Found a quiet observation deck and stood there for a while, watching the stars. She thought about her testimony, about the things she had said and the things she had left unsaid. She had told them about persistence hunting. She had not told them about the cave paintings, the ancient art that humans had created even while struggling to survive. She had not told them about the music, the stories, the dreams. She had told them about stress hormones. She had not told them about love, about the way humans would sacrifice everything for the people they cared about. She had not told them about hope, about the stubborn belief that things could get better even when all evidence said otherwise. There was so much more to humanity than survival, but survival was what the galaxy understood. Survival was what they feared and respected. Maybe someday they would understand the rest. Turned away from the window and went to find her ship. There was more work to be done, more bridges to build, more connections to make. The galaxy was vast and full of strangers, but humans had been turning strangers into friends for a very long time. They were just getting started. 50 years had passed since the hearing. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Alliances had shifted. New technologies had emerged. Species that had once been enemies now traded peacefully. Species that had once been friends had drifted apart. Such was the nature of time and politics and the slow turning of civilizations. But some things remained constant. The stories about humans, for instance, those had only grown. On a hive world called Prime, a clutch mother gathered her young in the nursery chamber. The children were barely out of their eggs, their carapaces still soft and pale. They clustered around her, clicking their mandibles with curiosity and hunger for knowledge. The clutch mother told them a story. Long ago, she said, before they had learned to travel between stars, they believed they were alone in the universe. They thought their careful ways and cautious nature were the only path to survival. They feared everything outside their hives. Then they met other species. Many of those species were dangerous. Some wanted to conquer some wanted to exploit them. They learned to be even more careful, even more cautious. But then they met the humans. The children clicked their questions. What were humans? Were they dangerous? The clutch mother considered her answer. Humans, she said, were very strange creatures. They were soft and slow and did not have proper carapaces. They could not see well in the dark. They could not fly. They seemed weak and fragile. But appearances were deceiving. Humans, the clutch mother explained, were called the enduring ones in many parts of the galaxy. They had earned this name through countless demonstrations of their most remarkable trait. They did not stop, ever. When humans wanted something, they pursued it until they achieved it or died trying. When humans faced an obstacle, they found a way around it or through it or over it. When humans suffered a setback, they got back up and tried again, and again, and again. This was frightening to many species. The clutch mother understood why. Such persistence could easily become aggression, conquest, domination. But the humans had made a different choice. They used their endless determination to build rather than destroy. They formed friendships with other species. They created trade networks that benefited everyone. They shared their knowledge freely. The clutch mother told her young ones that they should learn from the humans, not their recklessness, of course. The way was still the best way. But their persistence, their refusal to give up, their ability to face adversity and keep moving forward, these were worthy traits. The children listened with wide eyes. Some of them would grow up to be traders who worked alongside human partners. Some would become scholars who studied human culture. Some would never meet a human at all but would carry the stories with them throughout their lives. The tales spread far across the galaxy. In the great academies of the human history had become required study for all students. Professor stood before a class of young, her scales now pure white with age, her movements slow and careful. Behind her, a holographic display showed images from Earth's past. She was teaching about an event humans called the Endurance Expedition. Long ago, she explained, before humans had achieved spaceflight, a group of them had attempted to cross a frozen continent on there. Their ship had become trapped in ice. Then it had been crushed. They were stranded in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, with no hope of rescue. Any sensible species would have given up. The students understood this instinctively. When faced with certain death, it was logical to accept one's fate with dignity. But the humans had not given up. Their leader, a man named, had kept them alive for months on the ice. When the ice began to break up, they had sailed in tiny boats across freezing seas to a barren island. Then and a few others had sailed one of those boats 800 miles across the most dangerous ocean on Earth to reach a whaling station. They had arrived more dead than alive, but they had arrived. And then had gone back for the others. He had refused to leave anyone behind. In the end, every single member of the expedition survived. It was considered one of the greatest survival stories in human history. Professor paused to let the students absorb this. She could see the confusion in their faces. Such behavior did not compute according to logic. It was irrational, inefficient, dangerous. And yet there was something compelling about it. She told them about other events. The first Mars colonists, who had arrived to find their supply ships delayed and their equipment failing. They had survived for over a year on improvised solutions, growing food in soil that was essentially poison, repairing machines with whatever materials they could find. 3 of them had died. The rest had refused to leave their bodies behind when rescue finally came. She told them about the reconstruction, the period after a devastating war when humans had rebuilt their civilization almost from scratch. Cities had risen from ashes. Technologies had been reinvented. Cultures had been preserved through oral tradition and hidden archives. The humans had looked at the ruins of everything they had built and had simply started building again. The students took notes. They asked questions. They struggled to understand a species that seemed to defy the basic principles of survival. Professor did not have all the answers. She had spent her entire career studying humans, and she still did not fully understand them. But she had learned to appreciate them. They were not logical. They were not efficient. They did things that made no sense from any rational perspective. But they survived, they endured, they continued. And somehow, against all odds, they made things better. The tales spread further still. Among a warrior species that had once been among the most feared raiders in the galaxy, humans had earned a different kind of reputation. They had changed in the past 50 years. Their raiding days were behind them, at least officially. They had joined the Galactic Trade Compact and now operated as mercenaries and security consultants. It was more profitable than piracy and considerably less likely to result in their extinction. Human influence had played a role in this transformation, not through conquest or threats, but through example and patient diplomacy. Humans had shown that there were better ways to earn respect than through violence alone. Warlord gathered his subordinates in the training hall of their ship. They were traveling to a security contract on the Outer Rim, providing protection for a mining colony threatened by local pirates. It would be dangerous work. Wanted his warriors to understand what they might be facing. There were humans among the pirates, he told them. This was bad news. The younger warriors did not understand. Humans were small, they said, weak, soft, easy prey. Silence them with a gesture. He had fought humans, once long ago before the treaty. His raiding party had attacked a human colony expecting easy pickings. They had been wrong. The humans had fought back with a ferocity that had shocked them. They had used weapons. They had used tools. They had used their bare hands. They had protected their young with their bodies. They had died rather than surrender. And the ones who survived had tracked the ship. They had found it. They had boarded it. Had lost his right eye in that battle. He had lost many warriors. He had barely escaped with his life. He told his subordinates the lesson he had learned that day. Humans did not think like. They did not calculate odds and retreat when the numbers turned against them. They did not surrender when wounded or outnumbered. They did not stop fighting until they were dead. More than that, he said, humans remembered. They did not forgive attacks on their people. They did not forget those who had harmed them. Even if it took years, even if it took decades, they would find ways to balance the scales. The smart play, told his warriors, was to never give a human a reason to become an enemy. Earn their respect. Work alongside them. Fight with them, not against them. Because the alternative was not just losing a battle. It was gaining an enemy who would never, ever stop coming for you. The young warriors listened with new understanding. They had grown up with stories of glory, of conquest and dominance. But they had also grown up in a galaxy where humans were everywhere, building and trading and making alliances. Perhaps the old ways were not the only ways. Perhaps there was something to be learned from the enduring ones. The tales spread to every corner of the galaxy, changing as they traveled, growing as they were told and retold. Humans became legends in their own time, not because they sought glory, but simply because they were themselves. Had retired years ago. She lived now on a small world called New Promise, one of the first planets terraformed by human and alien cooperation. The sky was a soft blue, close enough to Earth's color to feel like home. The plants were a mix of species from a dozen worlds, carefully selected to create a functioning ecosystem. Her house sat on a hill overlooking a valley. Children played in the fields below, children of many species. Young chased eye pups while human kids refereed their games. A adolescent sat under a tree, reading. A young practiced combat forms in the morning light, watched by a human instructor who called out corrections. Watched them from her porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cool morning air. She was old now, her hair white, her hands spotted with age, but her eyes were still sharp. A vehicle approached on the road that led to her house. She was expecting it. A journalist from one of the galactic news networks had requested an interview. They wanted to talk about the legends, about the stories that surrounded humanity. The journalist was young, a species did not immediately recognize. Some kind of avian, perhaps, with iridescent feathers and large, intelligent eyes. They introduced themselves with a name could not properly pronounce. They sat together on the porch, looking out at the valley. The journalist asked their questions carefully, respectfully. They wanted to know if the stories were true. They wanted to understand how humans had become so legendary in such a short time. Considered her answers. The stories were true, she said, all of them. The survival feats, the incredible healing, the stubborn refusal to give up. Humans really were as remarkable as the legends claimed. But that was not the whole picture. The journalist waited, told them about something she had never discussed in public before, her own survival story. When she was 9 years old, she said, she had lived on a colony world called Mesa Verde. A flash flood had swept through their settlement without warning. In moments, everything had changed. Buildings had been destroyed. People had been scattered, had been separated from her family. She had found herself alone on a hillside, watching the waters rage below, with no idea if her parents were alive or dead. She had been terrified. She had wanted to curl up and cry and wait for someone to rescue her. But something inside her had refused. Some stubborn spark that said, no, you are not done yet. You will not give up. You will keep going. She had walked for 6 days through wilderness she did not know. She had eaten insects and bitter roots. She had drunk water from morning dew collected on leaves. She had hidden from predators and crossed swollen streams and climbed over rock slides. On the 7th day, she had reached a settlement. She had collapsed at the entrance and been carried inside. Her parents had survived, she said. They had been searching for her the entire time. When they were reunited, they had held her so tightly she thought her ribs might crack. The journalist was silent for a moment. Then they asked the obvious question. How had a 9-year-old child managed such a feat? Smiled. That was the secret, she said. That was what the galaxy did not fully understand about humans. It was not about special abilities or genetic advantages. It was about something simpler. Humans believed they could survive. They believed it with every fiber of their being. And so they acted on that belief. They took the next step and the next and the next until they reached safety or died trying. It was not logical, it was not efficient, but it worked. The journalist asked one more question. After everything she had seen, after all her years of service, what did hope for the future? She looked out at the valley, at the children of many species playing together, at the civilization that humanity had helped build not through conquest but through cooperation. She hoped, she said, that the galaxy would remember the right stories. Not just the tales of survival and endurance, but the tales of kindness, the tales of friendship, the tales of different species learning to understand each other. Humans had contributed their stubborn refusal to give up, but they had also contributed their capacity for love, for wonder, for hope. Those stories were worth spreading too. The journalist thanked her and left, watched their vehicle disappear down the road. Then she sat alone on her porch, watching the sun rise higher over the valley. The children's laughter drifted up on the morning breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was singing. She thought about all the humans who had come before her, all the ones who had struggled and suffered and survived against impossible odds, all the ones who had taken their pain and transformed it into something beautiful. She thought about all the humans who would come after her, all the ones who would carry the stories forward, adding new chapters, creating new legends. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not by being the strongest or the fastest, but but by being the most determined, the most persistent, the most unwilling to give up. And the stories they had yet to tell would be even better than the ones that came before. Closed her eyes and smiled. In the valley below, a child and a human child were building a tower out of stones. It fell down. They laughed and started again. That was the secret, really. That was everything you needed to know about humans. They laughed and they started again.